So, Claudia, we're really happy that you could join us today. We know you've been extremely outspoken about the farmers' protests, and you stood absolutely steadfast despite a lot of really vicious, racist, and misogynist attacks on you online. And we're also really happy that you can do this in this run up to International Women's Day. So that's brilliant. So would you like to maybe start off by telling us why you are supporting the farmers?
Well, you know, it's an incredibly important movement, and like so many of the people of Leicester East who are members of the Indian diaspora, essentially my constituents of Leicester East, I am very concerned that the Indian government feel they can treat peaceful protesters with violence, with injustice, and a complete lack of basic human rights. It just shone out to me in a massive way. And I've been extending my solidarity to the protesters who argue that the legislation in terms of the 3 laws would lead to the privatization and corporate takeover of the country's, essentially the country's agricultural sector, and remove long-standing government protections for farmers, including the guaranteed minimum price for crops. Essentially, we're talking about the private corporate takeover of farmers' lands. And I fear we are witnessing democracy being cast aside, the right to peaceful protest, long established rights, and the right to assembly. And I believe that we must therefore stand in solidarity with workers who are exercising their right to industrial action and peaceful protests. This is something that is not in a faraway land affecting people far away. The right to democracy and human rights is something that affects us all wherever we live in the world. And the notion that people can peacefully protest and be met with the almost undemocratic reaction of violence is something that we should all care about. And therefore, this is a movement that requires solidarity and is deeply relevant, of course, on International Women's Day too.
So would you like to say a little bit about why it's relevant on International Women's Day?
Well, you know, the farmers' protests has a devastating impact on women, and we've seen that. We've seen, for instance, young climate activist Disha Ravi, a young climate activist who was arrested by Delhi police for sharing, as I understand, a activist toolkit that Greta Thunberg posted in support of the farmers. A climate activist from India, she campaigns for clean air, for clean water and a livable planet. And imagine that this young activist faced effectively state-sanctioned violence for peacefully supporting farmers. There has been a disgraceful attack and lack of solidarity from the UK government, other wider international community when witnessing this. I mean, we're talking about women who are supporting protesters and yet who are being imprisoned for doing so. And I think that is a disgraceful action. We already know that women, when it comes to farming, make up a much smaller proportion of those who are responsible and managing the farming institutions. I think it's something like 20% in India itself. And, you know, in a sense, that sense of the farmers' protests also being about a reflection and a stand of solidarity by women, reflecting in a sense, the inequalities that women face even in farming, but equally that they are standing in protest. Women from anywhere at all ages, from as young as 16, 17 to as old as 85, are on the front line protesting alongside men to protect farmlands and to protect the livelihoods. And I think to see that and not see women's struggles within that, it would be a shame. And that's what I see when I see women at the forefront, on the front line of those peaceful farmers' protests. And then when you see that women who already are disadvantaged by the societal impact of farming itself because of the inequalities that they face and not sharing equally what is being developed in terms of the industry, but nonetheless quite prepared to be on the front line, quite prepared to be defending human rights, and then for the government to isolate women and to arrest them for peacefully protest. There's countless other names, of course, that we can mention, but to hear about their treatment also at the hands of state violence, to be sexualized, to face rape, to face sexism, to face abuse, to be imprisoned without the right to bail for significant lengths of times. This is something that we should all care about and all see that in terms of the role of women on the front line of protests. It's not something new, of course, to see women on the front line of protests. This is something that we know that women have done for centuries. And even in my own constituency of Leicester East, I was proud to be able to grow up knowing that the Indian women, South Asian women of the Imperial Typewriters factory led that strike action. I was inspired and grew up in that era, and in a sense was very proud, and I paid tribute to those women, of course, as today we must pay tribute to the women who are countlessly continue to be on the front line of progress, on the front line of solidarity, and on the front line of seeking change for what is otherwise an oppressive system. And I think it's right that we pay tribute, and it's right that we highlight their cause, and it's right that we expose the way in which authoritarian governments are choosing to target women as part of their state-sanctioned violent actions.
That is so true. I mean, everything you said is absolutely what's happening. And of course, we have a history in this country of militant struggle by South Asian women for years. I just wonder whether you'd like to say something about the recent comment by the Chief Justice of India that women should not be kept in the struggle, as he said.
Women should not be kept in the struggle.
Yes.
I missed.
I mean, his implication was that they had been taken to the struggle and simply put there, and that they should not be kept in the struggle. Those are the words he used.
Well, I mean, that sounds quite patronizing, in the sense that it's almost as though women haven't got a history of progressive militancy, if you like, or progressive action on the front lines of protecting democracies, and on the front lines of peacefully protesting against inequalities. And we've known that women have been at the forefront and on the front line of progressive struggles over many, many years. And so it is certainly probably on the realms of misogynistic, sexist, to assume that women are only on the front line because somehow they've been forced to be there. The only force that they have that brings them to that position is the force of state violence and the force of state oppression and the inequalities that continue to exist. And what we're seeing is not only women farmers, women labourers, mothers, parents, people that are absolutely caring for their society and want to see a better future. And they're on the front line because they want that better future, and they want the change, and they want the end of this sort of state-sanctioned oppression and violence. Because in a sense, equality for women and equality will bring about equality for all. That is what I think women have known for centuries. And that's why it was so important, I think, when we've seen very little action from governments across the world, very little international solidarity. That's why it was so important that women who were not political people necessarily, but other women, other voices to come forward and shine a light on what was going on in India in terms of the farmers' protests. And that's why I do pay tribute to women like Greta Thunberg, like the acclaimed singer Rihanna, and like Mina Harris. They brought a sense of attention and voice to the farmer struggle, and they did so as women, and in where other voices, and in particular political voices, were absent and missing, and the international solidarity was absent and missing. Because were it not for those voices, we would not have seen the attention that we are seeing in terms of some of the international media and governments today, to be able to bring to be able to shine a light on what was happening to Indian farmers, and in particular what was happening to women on the front line. And we can't forget, shining a light in the way that those non-state actors, if you like, did, highlighted, for example, the very important cases of people like Nodeep Kaur, a young 24-year-old union activist, a labourer, somebody who sat on the front line with farmers, who eloquently and directly highlighted the cause and why the protest was necessary, and why people have come from all over India to protest in the way that they had. And 250 million was at one count at one rally, in terms of people that came, and she was able to explain what happened. But for her troubles, she was imprisoned by the police, state sanctioned imprisonment, without the usual processes of bail, without the usual justices. And it was right, therefore, that we were brought, her case was brought to significant attention. And so to those people in positions of decision-making power, who try to dismiss or undermine or diminish the role of women as something nothing more than an appendage to men or farmers' cause more generally, they are wrong. Yes, they're wrong completely. Because women have always been at the forefront of these of campaigns such as these, and always at the forefront of change, and have always been on the front line.
Yes, of course, it's particularly shocking that this should be the Chief Justice of India, which says Absolutely. Something. But anyway, can we just go on to, you have already mentioned the lack of support from the British government. Would you like to maybe say something about the extent to which the British government is implicated in the crushing of human rights and freedom of expression in India?
Well, for the UK really to pride itself on being a world leader, which it often does, a world leader of democracy, essentially the UK must lead. It must lead the international community in holding the Indian government to account for its actions. It can't cower away now, when it clearly sees the level of atrocities. You can't not hide away and not see the barbed wire, the water cannons, the attacks on citizens. You can't ignore that and pretend that you have nothing to say to your Indian counterparts, and nothing to say about the way in which these actions are not being used in a state of war, but are being used on your own citizens. Therefore, the UK government, in its constant dialogue with India, must raise these issues, must challenge the Indian government for its actions. And I've raised this issue with the UK Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, urging them to formally condemn the state violence. I've also encouraged the UK government to speak with the Indian government about listening to the farmers' concerns and engaging with them and their trade unions. I've also urged the UK government to immediately cease the sale of weapons, including water cannons, tear gases and batons, which could be used against protesters in India, against their own citizens, just as it was morally reprehensible for the UK to export equipment, weapons, riot weapons to America that was used against Black Lives Matter's protesters following the murder of George Floyd. It is wrong for peaceful Indian protesters to be brutalized by equipment sold from Britain. Britain has a responsibility and a role to intervene, to act. Of course, it holds itself back because of course, of its historical imperialistic and colonial role that it's had in India. But they shouldn't, in a sense, that is not a reason to hold back to protect democracy. But of course, the UK, we cannot forget the UK's role in undermining over centuries through colonialism, through imperialism, Indian progress. And we know from history, the history tells us when the British left India after raping and pillaging it and engaging in its imperialistic actions, when they left India, India had just 4% of the world's standing in terms of GDP than when the British arrived, where it was at 26% of GDP standing. So it's without doubt that Britain raped and plundered and stripped India through its imperialistic, colonialist oppression. And of course, Britain has yet to pay, to engage in reparations for the damage that it caused, and it should do. But equally, Britain should not cower away from holding India to account for democracy and human rights abuses, because if that's the case, we might as well all give up and just insulate ourselves in our own nationalistic domains in our own countries and not be concerned about the human rights abuses elsewhere going on in the world. We have every right to be concerned about the human rights abuses, and particularly when we are trading with countries that are violating human rights abuses, then we must use our trading power to affect and ensure that citizens aren't being abused and facing the sort of state-sanctioned oppression that they are. So Britain has a role, absolutely, we could go further in terms of the British government and so on, in terms of how they benefit.
This is what I wanted to ask you about. Is that plunder, in a sense, still going on by the way in which Britain benefits from the corporatization of agriculture, for example? The British government and the British banks and so on, do they benefit from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to our shame that we have to recognise the role of the UK in materially supporting violence and oppression across the globe. The UK was the world's biggest arms exporter behind the United States over the past decade. Orders worth 11 billion were won by UK arms manufacturers, profiting from people's grief. In 2019 alone, the UK has licensed 550 million worth of arms to India since May 2015, profiting from the exploitation that's going on. In other words, we cannot allow UK companies to profit from the suffering of Indian farmers. And I've also encouraged the UK government to stop exporting the exports of pesticides. I mean, this is alarming that pesticides banned in the UK to India and other countries, including paraquat, which is responsible for thousands of farmer deaths in India. A situation so severe that doctors in India have resorted to hunger strikes demanding a ban on its usage. Well, I've been asking the government to ban the export of pesticides such as these, which are dangerous. We need agricultural development and farming in India to develop on sustainable environmental grounds. And that means that, you know, that there needs to be more organic development of farming. And sadly, that won't be the case if we're importing poisonous pesticides in order to somehow sell a myth that crops will be developed more, you know, much quicker, more healthier, gaining greater profits and so on. I think the farmers of India should be more concerned about the environmental sustainability and a healthy nation, and what they export from the crops is healthy. And that's why we need to urge the organic farming industry to develop more in India, but they won't, whilst actors like the UK are on the world stage selling dangerous pesticides and other genetic influenced farming practices that are bad and wrong for environmental and sustainable development, and indeed are wrong for the way in which the farming in India could be developed and could grow and could expand. You know, it's true, you know, farming in India feeds the world, and we need to ensure that that is continuously sustainable, and that corporations and the private sector here in the UK aren't exploiting and benefiting and continuously profiteering from the misery and of farming in India. And I say the misery simply because we know that even before the farmers' protests, we know how much we know that the farming industry does need some kind of look at itself, in the sense that there have been too many farmers suicides or deaths over time, simply because people are getting into extortionate debts that they cannot repay, and because they can't repay those debts, they are resorting to suicide, sadly. So there are things that are wrong, but I think it's because of Western exploitation that has not helped. And that's the problem.
I mean, I think it is, you know, Monsanto and other corporates, they sell seeds which according to them, require these sort of inputs, which are so dangerous, and not only that, cause massive debt. And, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because farmers become reliant on these sort of quick win seeds or injections into farming, unnatural injections into farming, if you like, and if the crops do not flourish in the way that they should, it can lead to a disastrous
yeah. And
outcome.
they're often coerced into this as well, which is really terrible.
It's absolutely horrific when you hear some of the stories, and when I listen to what constituents tell me about, what's happening with their families in terms of, they largely come from farming communities, and what happens with those farming communities and those households and their families, and the struggles that they have with sustaining an environmental and sustainable farming, then the stories are horrific. And of course, these things were there before the farmers' protest. The farmers' protest is a deep protest in terms of, on the surface, it's about the farming laws, the 3 farming laws, but there's something quite much deeper going on as well. And the only positive stories I ever hear about is those that have chosen organic farming, and that seems to be the future, but it is not immediately profitable. It requires investment, and it requires time to grow. And I can only compare the situation to places, to even places in the Caribbean. The place where my parents come from, in Nevis, for example, it's pure farming land, but there's no farming going on anymore. And people, when I go to Nevis, we are dealing with supermarkets that are American supermarkets, and people are queuing up at supermarkets which are American supermarkets, eating American brands and food. And I wouldn't like to see that happen to India anytime soon.
That's the whole nature of imperialism, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
It's continuing. Would you like to just explain what the role of the conceptual framework on agriculture and also the UK-India infrastructure technical cooperation facility?
Well, I mean, I'll have a go. I mean, I think it's vital that the UK government must not finance the global spread of extractive neoliberalism. Yet that is exactly what they've been doing with the conceptual framework on agriculture and the UK-India infrastructure technical cooperation facility, which promotes contract farming. It's one of the issues that the farmers are indeed protesting about, and finances essentially consultants to alleviate bottlenecks to private sector investment in agriculture in India. So that is the danger of that framework, in the sense that people are profiting as consultants, and their role is to kind of open up those bottlenecks so that the private sector can get in there and invest in farmland and in agriculture in India. The beneficiaries, of course, is the private sector. The losses are to ordinary farmers. The UK government, in my view, must revise this deeply worrying international arrangement, especially given the clear display of opposition within India to these neoliberal policies that they promote. And I think that's therefore a just reason and a just cause why the farmers are on the front line peacefully protesting about the privatization and corporate takeover. It is these very frameworks that they're opposing, and they're right to do so. Whether they get through this authoritarian government in doing so is another matter. But I think that solidarity and unity is important. Understanding those why people are on the front line. This is essentially a class issue. It's essentially a class issue. It's essentially the workers are rising up and saying enough is enough. That they know the 1%, those that are seeking to profiteer, the big corporate sector, the big business that's seeking to profiteer from farming in India, they're saying no to that. And it's right for them to say no to that. It's right for them to protest and to highlight that. So important.
Well, you've explained so much about the British involvement. Would you like to maybe say something about what you faced as a result of the solidarity you've shown? The kind of
well,
vicious...
You know, it's the level of misogynistic abuse because of the support that I have shown the farmers. It's really been horrific. And I, along with, of course, other supporters of the farmers' cause, have been subjected to horrific, racist, misogynistic, and violent online abuse. And, you know, social media is a funny thing. You can be so frightened, even though you are safely behind a screen somewhere, and but the abuse that comes at you frightens you. It frightens me, and it shocked me that I should receive death threats, that I should receive misogynistic abuse, that I should receive such vile sexism, that I should be treated as though I am insignificant and need to be trampled on, not just trampled on, but crushed. It shocked me because, of course, this abuse was coming at 10 to the dozen, as though it was machine operated bots on charge. I, of course, have the protection of a mute button, but so what shocked me more than what I was feeling and what I was experiencing was, if this was happening to me, what must it be like for people on the ground, and in particular, what must it be like for women on the ground? And those standing in solidarity with Indian farmers are facing the most horrific abuse. Social media companies and government must work together to root out the epidemic of online abuse that plagues the online physical or online political sphere, rather, and which disproportionately targets women. It's without a doubt that it does so. And if the intent of this abuse is to prevent me from speaking out on this issue, I, of course, should not be silenced. I shall continue to stand in solidarity with Indian farmers, as well as protesters across the world who are exercising their basic human rights, the right to free expression and the right to peaceful protest. I will not be silenced. I will always stand in solidarity, and I will always be inspired with other women who do so too.
Thank you so much for that, Claudia. That's so inspiring to hear you say that. And what you're aware of, what you faced, is a systematic attack. You know, and every woman who has stood up against the government's policies has faced this. But of course, in your case, it's particularly vicious because it's also deeply racist.
Yes.
I just wonder if you might want to say something about the debate which is going to happen in the House of Commons on Monday. Are you hopeful, or what are you going to say, etc.?
Well, of course, the petition that has emerged, born from the community, is such an important petition. And the target to achieve 10,000 to get just a government response, 100,000 just to get the debate. It's a significant achievement. It's a powerful achievement because there's been many petitions over the years on many other subject matters that have never reached that threshold for debate. And this shows you how powerful and important the issue is in the UK for UK citizens. And therefore, it commands now politicians in the House to debate this issue on all sides of the House. And we'll have that debate now, despite the coronavirus restrictions. We'll have that debate on Monday, March the 8th. Quite significant that it should be tabled for Monday, March the 8th. It just happened to be the available time slot. Because, of course, Monday, March the 8th is International Women's Day. So it's quite significant, quite important. We'll have that debate and therefore seek to push the government to a much greater statement than it's made to date, which has been very little. And so if we can get the government to stand up to its its position of wanting to be that global leader in tackling sort of oppression and human rights and fighting for democracy. If it wants to stand with the UN, who have now come out as well and made a statement about the support that is needed for the farmers and what the Indian government should really be doing, which is actually listening to the farmers. The UK can stand, show its true colours through the government. The government can stand up now for once and seek to challenge, if you like, the Indian government to respect its citizens in the way that it hasn't done to date. That our debate on Monday the 8th will hopefully continue to shine that light, to continue to push the government to make a more meaningful statement, take more meaningful action, and hopefully maybe put on record their condemnation. If we can't get them to put on record their condemnation, we'll certainly have a good go, a good debate, and push for action. But it means that we will continue, we'll have placed this firmly and squarely in the mindsets of everyone in the UK, because it will also attract mainstream media coverage as well. So no one can be in any doubt about the concerns of UK citizens, about the impact that this is having, about in terms of the farmers' protest, the impact that the farmers' protest is having across the world. And so I hope that it will lead to a domino effect, that other governments across the world will seek to have the debate and discussion so necessary to recognize the Indian diaspora across the world, to recognize the plight of the Indian farmers and what it means to the Indian diaspora across the world, what it means for democracy, what it means for human rights, and that it will be a domino effect of action in terms of governments across the world, until the Indian government finally realizes that this cannot be hid under the table, and they themselves should have had a more public, transparent, open, honest debate and conversation with its own citizens about their rights and what they're peacefully protesting. I hope it has that effect, and I hope it leads to change. And I hope that it will mean that for farmers in India who are peacefully protesting, they will see that their actions can lead to change, and that they will be able to go back to their farms and progress, the kind of societal change, the kind of farming that we want to see in the world.
Well, let's hope that happens. For now, of course, the struggle continues. So
Indeed.
Thank you so much. Is there anything more you'd like to add or say, or send any message? Or?
Well, all I would just say is for people to recognize, and I think, hopefully unions across the world to recognize this is the biggest strike action anywhere in the world. And people in these times where coronavirus has shone a light on so many inequalities, has shone a light on the change that we want to see in the world, that we need to build back better, that it is our duty across the world as union activists, as politicians, to support the farmers, to recognize this is farmers' action, the largest strike action anywhere in the world, and to continue to show solidarity all the way for however long it takes, because the farmers aren't giving up, and neither should we.
Thank you very much, Claudia.
Thank you.